Hi and welcome. I'm Dinda Elliott, Director of Programs at China Institute, and I am so happy to welcome Kai-Fu Lee, who really needs no introduction. Kai-Fu is a computer scientist, a businessman, venture capitalist, and an author. And as the founding director of Microsoft Research Asia and former president of Google China, he is really one of the most prominent figures in the Chinese internet sector. He has more than 50 million followers on Sina Weibo, so say no more. We're equally delighted that Gideon Lichfield, editor-in-chief of MIT Technology Review, will engage Kai-Fu in a fireside chat about US-China competition and the future of technology. Over to you, Gideon.
Thank you very much, Linda. Thanks everybody who's here. Good to see you all. And Kai-Fu, hi. How are you doing this evening?
Hi, Gideon. I'm doing great. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. So let's start. I mean, the issues that I think we're interested in discussing today are about everything that has been going on around the pandemic and the geopolitical tensions. Where are China and the US's technology sectors today relative to one another, and how is each one of them going to benefit or be impacted by all the changes that have been going on? So MIT Technology Review, not to do a plug for us too much, but we ran a special issue coming up on 2 years ago now about all of the ways in which China is a rising technology superpower. We looked at nuclear power, we looked at AI, we looked at clean energy, quantum computing, all sorts of areas where China has really put a focus on trying to strengthen its technology sector. So my first question to you, Kai-Fu, is, in broad terms, amid all of these geopolitical tensions that we're seeing today and with the pandemic, is China's technology sector still forging ahead? And where do you think are the areas in which it is strongest?
Sure. Yeah, it's a pleasure to speak at this forum again. China has really proven itself to have become an innovator just in the last 10 years. Most notably through the internet, mobile apps, and also artificial intelligence, but increasingly in more basic science areas as well. I think this comes as a surprise, and sometimes it's hard to understand from an American perspective how a country or companies in a country could have gone from a copycat status to an innovator status in merely matter of 10 years. Only 10 years ago, we were still seeing quite a few copycats in China. For example, when Groupon came out, there were 6,000 copycats. What happened in the last 10 years was that a very large market attracted a lot of investment dollars, and that really nurtured entrepreneurs who competed in a gladiatorial winner-take-all environment in a large market, so it was worth a lot of money, and they created products that drew more people onto the mobile internet. So as the mobile internet grew from tens of millions of people to almost 1 billion people today, this population dividend really helped create many of these really giant companies in the last 10 years, including Meituan, Didi, and most recently ByteDance, the parent of TikTok, and Xiaomi, and many, many others. This really last 10 years was the 10 years of excellent engineering, great product management, and good innovations. So we're at a stage now, the Chinese product managers are as good as American product managers. Chinese applied research is as good as American applied research. Basic research still lags a bit. And I think the Chinese products are really blossoming. I think TikTok is a perfect example of a product that American companies now try to copy but failed. So I would anticipate this entrepreneurial spirit and large market to continue to fuel the growth. Some things, of course, will be different. The Chinese enterprise market is not nearly as good. I think the mobile users have saturated, so the dividend population growth is over. So it's going to have to come from other things, such as efficiency improvements, productivity improvements, and so on. Also, I think with the U.S.-China tension, I think there are obviously some questions about whether certain companies may face some challenges. But overall, all the sectors are going extremely well. And the last point I want to make is that the new China stock market called STAR, S-T-A-R, has been a phenomenal event for Chinese tech companies, because this previously in China, for a tech company to go public, you'd have to prove a consecutive profit for multiple years, which was very hard to do. Most tech companies didn't have that when they went public, but now the STAR market no longer has that requirement. It does have actually a requirement that you must be a tech company, proven by the number of patents and many, many other things. So I think this demonstrates the government's intent to promote technology companies, and also a lot of investment dollars going into the STAR market have boosted the valuation. One could argue a little bit inflated at this stage, but I think tech investing's become really hot. Tech companies are valued quite highly, as much as the American tech companies nowadays, for different reasons. So I think the tech is really booming in China.
Thank you. There's quite a lot in that answer that I want to pick up on, but I'll come back to some of those points. So the next thing that I wanted to touch on is like which particular areas of the most cutting edge advanced technology do you think are you excited by? I mean, AI is the obvious one. It's one way everyone knows China is strong. It's what you wrote your book about. So how first of all, how do you feel the state of AI, the AI field in China is compared with the US? And then what other technological areas do you think we should be keeping an eye on?
Sure. AI is a broad area. And as I mentioned in my book, that I had expected 2.5 years ago that China would more or less catch up with the US in applied AI by this time. And I think it has. China is farther ahead in certain areas, in drones, in products involving machine translation, speech recognition, object recognition. China tends to be ahead. In terms of enterprise software, enterprise intelligence, data science, US tends to be ahead. In autonomous vehicle, US tends to be ahead, but China has an interesting advantage. That is, would the government build more infrastructure that allows autonomous vehicles to drive more safely? So I think in the area of AI, China is roughly caught up with the US, with the US further ahead in fundamental research in AI, as well as almost any other domain. But China is even catching up quickly in other scientific areas. In terms of kinds of things we're excited, I'm a venture capitalist. So I want to talk about, as a venture capitalist, where do we see exciting technology applications? We're very excited about the progress that's been made in natural language processing. The idea of using pre-trained large generic models will probably do to natural language what convolutional neural networks have done to image recognition. So we anticipate many natural language applications would start to appear. Human quality real-time machine translation, much higher quality search engine, much better advertising, targeting, much better quality question answering, really elevating search engine to a level of answering questions, not finding results. So, and of course, conversational technologies, smart agents, virtual teachers. So that will blossom out of a machine that can begin to have a notion of understanding general language. So we're excited about that as a fundamental technology. We're also excited about a number of key application areas. Healthcare is one I'm hugely excited about in terms of not just applying AI to healthcare, but also for the first time, we're gathering a lot of data within healthcare. So the possibility of AI radiologists, AI pathologists, AI diagnostic tool for doctors can all start to be developed, because never before have we had so much data. Healthcare is an area that's really operated on very thin data based on human knowledge. But as we know, when you have a large amount of data in a single domain, AI will beat humans. So healthcare is an exciting area because this will bring tremendous benefit to humanity. We also feel that in terms of autonomous vehicles, probably a lot of applications will be found in limited applications. So robotics, the use of robotics in factories, smart forklifts, smart vehicles that will move from point to point, not necessarily L5, but starting to do better than human capability. That is, the cost of a fully autonomous machine costs less than human operating a manual machine. That is beginning to happen in manufacturing, in warehouses. So we're excited about that. I could go on, but these are probably the top few.
I mean, it's a great list. When you mention smart vehicles, L5 obviously means the 5th level complete autonomy. And you also said something about China building more infrastructure that might enable autonomous vehicles. So are you thinking about like roads that are specially designed with markings or sensors or things that AVs could drive along safely? Do you think there's more likely to be some of that?
Yes, smart roads with sensors built in that could give hints when autonomous vehicles are about to do something not so smart, or sensors in highways that tells cars what's happening, half a mile out when it's not visually easily to see, and to provide greater safety. Even smarter downtown areas. Imagine a downtown with 2 layers. 1 layer for cars and 1 layer for pedestrians. That would eliminate the possibility that a car would ever hit a pedestrian, thereby making currently borderline technologies ready to be launched sooner. I'm not sure which country will be the first to launch these smart roads in cities, but I know they're being planned in China as well as in other countries. But I think that is probably our best path towards L5 deployment in the next 10 to 15 years.
Right. I mean, the things you're describing, a lot of them do depend on having a willingness to invest in infrastructure. And traditionally, certainly in the last few years or decades, China has been much more willing to invest in infrastructure than certainly the US and even a lot of Europe and other countries. Do you feel like that trend is going to continue?
I believe so. And I think investing in infrastructure is really smart, because if a government decides to build companies and technologies, namely using state-owned enterprises, they're known not to be so efficient in developing products. The venture capital startup environment works great. So what any government ought to think about doing is doing things that private enterprises cannot do, are not financially incented to do. So things like building a great 5G or 6G infrastructure, making sure data centers are cheaply spread across the country to provide good coverage, making sure that IoT can transmit volumes of data, ensuring that smart highways, smart cities, smart downtowns can provide infrastructure to have autonomous vehicles launch faster, sooner, safer. And also, it's a good way, governments shouldn't judge projects in general, because that's what VCs are supposed to be able to do professionally. So another infrastructural play is for a government to set up to become an LP in key strategic areas for VCs to set up funds. So let's say a country wants to get ahead in bio, or get ahead in materials, or get ahead in AI. That country can say, prove you're a competent VC, and we want to incent more VCs to do this, even though it's riskier. We will be your LP, and but if you make money, we will give back some of that money to you, and perhaps to your other LPs. So government, as a financial supplier and a passive LP, can targetedly put money into industries that are strategically important for the country or for humanity, that may be a little bit too risky for VCs to do voluntarily. So China has done this, so has Singapore and Israel, and these are infrastructure plays China has done, and I think we're continuing to see that the Chinese government, both central and local, continuing to do this.
That's a really interesting example and argument, because I feel like over here in the US, there's a lot of fear or a lot of worries that the technology industry hasn't had the incentives to invest in the kinds of long-term things that we need for things like fighting climate change or preparing for pandemics. What you're suggesting seems to be a market-friendly way of doing that.
Yes, yes.
Let's talk a little bit, going back to some of the other things you mentioned. Healthcare, obviously, again, a very important topic right now. And you mentioned the importance of data. There's this common understanding or trope that China has a lot of data because it has a lot of people and it has fairly relaxed laws about the use of the data. Do you think is that fair? Is that helping the healthcare industry? Are there any particular advances you can point to that are specifically a result of that?
Sure. China does have laws that protect privacy. In particular, China has very stringent laws against selling of data without the user consent. So the kind of thing that Cambridge Analytica did with the Facebook data would have been punishable by much more serious consequence than in the West even. So China does have laws. There are different laws. On the other hand, I think when you look at the US, the HIPAA laws trying to safeguard the personal private data, not to be stolen, taken, or reverse engineered, requiring multiple layers of complex approvals, is kind of hurting the ability to advance artificial intelligence for healthcare in the US. Now, I think we all want to see healthcare data to become protected for the privacy of the user, but if you take it too far, you wouldn't have a large enough pool of data to build the smartest, best models that can help with diagnosis and save lives. So HIPAA, when it was created back in its time, was very well intentioned and very effective, but now in the age of AI, it really needs to be rethought. So China, in terms of data aggregation, as I mentioned, does have rules that wouldn't allow one company to sell data to another, but the government is actually trying to actively promote the aggregation of anonymized data. So data that's been cleansed and anonymized can be pulled together as national databases for researchers to use, for example. Also, there are technologies. This, I think, is not with national boundaries, like federated learning, that allows people to train at each hospital and aggregate the trained models, but not share the data across the hospital so that each patient's data stays within the hospital. So I believe that when we think about healthcare, we should really think about ways that we can have our cake and eat it too. Protect the privacy the best we can do with anonymized data, aggregating them to train great AI models for the benefit of humanity, and also provide some of these anonymized models available for researchers. So I think China is thinking ahead in this issue, and we're seeing a number of companies and consortia that are starting to develop large amounts of data. I am seeing many data sets that are on the order of tens of millions or even over 100 million sample sizes. So this is, I think, we're beginning to see the beginning of data providing an advantage for healthcare, just as data did that for mobile applications.
Yeah. You mentioned that you think the US is still ahead of China in basic research. You said specifically in AI, but I think you said in a lot of fields as well. But obviously, basic research in China has also come a very long way. And if one looks at something like measures of the number of patents published, it's rapidly rising in China. Investment in R&D and in basic research in China has also been rising very fast compared with what it is in the West. So at what point, when you say that basic research in the US is ahead, why do you think that is? What do you mean by that? And do you see a tipping point coming? What do you think it would take for China to level with the US on that?
Well, in specific areas, China is doing quite well. For example, the Allen Institute in Seattle has measured the quality AI papers from China and US. And if you measure at the top 10% of the papers, China's caught up with the US already. If you measure top 1%, US is still a few years ahead of China in that case. So in the specific area of AI, because this has drawn a lot of Chinese engineers to the domain, it's beginning to catch up. Where I think U.S. has some fundamental advantages. One is in theoretical, basic theoretical, fundamental breakthrough work, things that are worthy of a Turing Award or a Nobel Prize. U.S. is way ahead of all the countries, and I think that's one area. The other is just amazing universities and research institutes that draw talent from across the world, and some choose to stay. And that ability, research is about having the smartest people. And U.S. has a smaller population than China and India, but yet can draw a lot of students from China, India, Iran, and Korea, and many other countries to study here, and some stay. I think that is a virtuous cycle. That is an advantage, assuming the immigration laws don't change too much in the coming years. And I think also, China has improved a lot in fundamental research, but becoming the world's leader in research, basic fundamental research, is not something that can be done in a matter of 5 or 10 years. It takes much longer. We go back in time, it took much longer for U.S. to leap ahead of Germany back a long time ago. So I would imagine U.S. Can and will enjoy a significant leadership in fundamental research for some time to come. Although I would say the current immigration trajectory is potentially shortening that leadership if it continues to be that way, because I think people have to realize the ability to draw talent globally is, and then having an infrastructure that keeps them, is basically a virtuous cycle that keeps U.S. ahead.
Bringing up that question of immigration laws and the general rising suspicions, do you think that this hurts the U.S. more or China more, or both? And when I say the U.S. or China, I mean specifically the technological and scientific establishments.
You're talking about having fewer Chinese students in the U.S.? Is that what you meant?
Yes, and the general kind of rising suspicion between the two.
Yeah, I think in the short term, it hurts both, right? Chinese students will have fewer top schools that they can choose from, and U.S. universities will have fewer top students that they would have been able to attract. So it's a lose-lose in the short term. But the long term, I think it's a big lose for the U.S. because that virtuous cycle disappears.
Right. I'd like to turn to the question of 5G as well. It's something that obviously is rolling out.
Okay.
In the US, I feel like people still don't really understand what the benefits of 5G might be, what it brings to them. Can you talk a little bit about how it's been rolling out in China? What differences has it made? What things are becoming possible now?
I think 5G has been rolled out a little more in China, not a whole lot more. People are asking the same question here. I don't think there are any definitive answers. I think in the beginning, people generally point to B2B applications, things like telemedicine, remote education, and things like that, where you can afford to make both all ends of the connection connect to 5G. The problem of consumer applications is that unless you have enough coverage of your user population base, developers aren't going to build the amazing next killer app, right? For example, one could argue that Snapchat and TikTok are the big killer apps of 4G industry, but they really didn't become popular when 4G began to roll out. These companies were planning to roll these products out when there was a sufficient base of 4G users. So we're not nearly there yet for either China or US. So I think the consumer killer apps are to be seen. The B2B apps where you can control both sides, whether it's remote driverless car control or telemedicine. I think there are a number of applications, but at the end of the day, these vertical apps are not going to move a platform technology. We're going to need the consumer technologies. So I think just like in 4G, there's going to be trial and error. I have no doubt something will emerge. Nothing is a clear winner at the consumer platform level at this stage yet. So I'll keep looking.
All right, thanks. I actually have a follow-up question from someone in the audience asking, why, can you explain further why in the long term the US loses more for not having Chinese students studying here?
Okay, I'll try to explain again. I'm one of the beneficiaries of the amazing American education, research, and PhD system. So I personally experienced this, that because US, the virtuous cycle is that US has the world's best universities and the best research labs and the best research professors and programs. So this draws top people worldwide, highest IQ people. So if you think about the success of a research program is the ability to draw more high IQ people than other countries. So by that measure, if each country sends only its students to its universities, China will do 4 to 5 times better than US because of a larger population, and so would India. But actually what's happened in the last 30 or 40 years is that the smartest, highest IQ Chinese students, Indian students, Korean students, Iranian students, many of them come to US. And when they come, some percentage go back and some percentage stay. So that's how US, with a relatively small population, managed to keep a much bigger ratio of high IQ, super smart researchers because of this virtuous cycle. So if the system starts to change and say, oh, we want fewer people from country A, B, and C, then it will have a smaller pool to draw from. And even countries C, D, and E will start to worry, oh, should I worry about studying in the US? Because in the UK, everyone has they take everybody. In the US, they currently don't take countries A, B, C. I'm in country D, but can I be sure that before I finish my PhD, I'll be rejected my visa? Is it worth it to go to MIT versus Cambridge, right? So that's the fundamental long-term issue, is that should US get a smaller pipe of these high IQ people, that is a big long-term lose.
And is China trying actively to attract those people to its own universities?
Not really. China, unlike the US, I mean, this is another advantage of the US, is that it's a melting pot of multicultural. Everybody potentially can move there and immigrant. The immigrants are a huge part of America's success. China has always been homogenous. There's a diaspora that goes back, overseas Chinese. The benefit of China is that the population is large and many people want to stay or come back. Now, over time, that could change. Singapore has attracted foreign talent, but at the current trajectory, I don't think China in the next 5 or 10 years can become a Singapore. So China will have a different model of using mostly Chinese domestic and returnees to build its technology programs.
Right. Well, Kai-Fu, we're out of time. I want to really thank you very much for that fascinating overview. I think the picture that you drew for us is of the US facing some serious challenges and China pulling ahead in many respects, but that the US still needs to remember the inherent advantages that it still has and keep capitalizing on them in order not to fall behind.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks a lot for joining us.
I want to thank Gideon and Kai-Fu so much. I mean, Kai-Fu, a couple of things stuck in my mind that you said that were really fantastic. One was gladiatorial winner-take-all environment, which is an amazing way of describing the Chinese, incredibly competitive environment. The other thing you talked about was the idea of machines becoming better than humans. And I know you've written about and done a lot of thinking about the future of work. So that's something that we'll bring you back to talk about again. The third thing is that your solutions they're not ideological. Everything you talk about is practical. And that's what's so fantastic about, I hope, this entire conference. But I'm so grateful to you for just being, you're a problem solver and you look at data and you talk about the facts, which is just incredibly valuable. So thank you for that so much. And we hope you'll come back and speak again.